So I think we're a few minutes after the hour, so I think we probably get a bit better get started. I see that Kitty's just joined us, who's gonna. If you're ready, Kitty, would you mind leading off the call this today?
That is fine. I'm sorry I'm late. Was having trouble getting onto the Zoom link. But yes, so thank you everybody. Good evening, and welcome to the Grassroots conference call for March. If this is anyone's first time on a Results Monthly Grassroots conference call, then a very warm welcome to you. My name is Kitty Airy, and I'm the Chief Executive of Results UK. On these regular calls, we share what we've been achieving together in our advocacy on international development issues. This year so far, we've held calls on a Thursday, and we need to find out what works best for you all very soon. We've been used to meeting on a on a Tuesday for many years, and a few people have told us about their regular commitments, so expect a consultation on this very soon. I'll start off with the usual housekeeping messages. So please keep yourself muted during the call, and if you have any questions or comments, please use the chat box. Captions are turned on, so if you want to enable or disable these, you can do so by using the Zoom toolbar. We are recording this call, so if you prefer not to be visible in the recording, please feel free to turn off your video. And if you are new to the call, or if you're not, please feel free to introduce yourself, either by unmuting and saying hello, or by writing in the chat box. So this month, we're going to talk about the massive issue that's been in the news, which is, of course, last week's cut to the UK's aid budget, or Official Development Assistance, ODA, as it's more accurately called, which pays for the things we contribute to globally that help reduce poverty and inequality. So, for example, that includes the big global funds such as Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, the Global Fund to fight HIV, TB, and malaria, and the Global Partnership for Education, which collectively make a difference to millions of people through improved health or life chances. After last month's call, we had a great question from Wendy in Edinburgh, who spotted that we hadn't properly explained what ODA was. And since then, Ricky has written a fantastic blog post called Cracking the Development Jargon, which we're going to link to in the chat box. I hope many of you will find this useful. Please do call out anything on this call you don't understand. We do cover a lot of technical details on these calls, and it's completely okay not to know the acronyms. This is really important. Incidentally, if you've ever wondered what counts as official development assistance, then there is in fact a globally agreed definition, which we are also going to link to in the chat, which you might find useful for future reference. For example, it rules out military spending unless incurred purely for humanitarian purposes, but allows for some spending on supporting refugees in your own country. At this stage of the call, we usually start off by making a few remarks about the political situation we find ourselves in and how this is going to make a difference to our advocacy for international development in the current context. But this month, I'm not going to do that because that's what our speakers are here for. This month, we have not one but two speakers who are going to set out the current status of official development assistance in both the US and the UK, which are two of the world's biggest aid donors by absolute amount, which will have a massive impact on people around the world. So more on this when Naveed introduces them in a few minutes. I would like to, however, go straight to the part of the call where we hear about what you've been doing around the UK. So Naveed, over to you for that, and then you could introduce the speakers for tonight.
Thanks, Kitty. So for me, this bit is a really important part of this regular call. I think it's vital that we hear about, what's happened as a result of your campaigning and to share successes. And, we all need motivation to carry on with our advocacy, don't we? So, and to know that we're part of a larger movement that's making a difference, even if slowly. And I would say particularly when the going gets a bit tougher as it is now. In recent months, we've talked a lot on these calls about the need for persistence in reaching MPs, and I'm really happy to report, I think this has sort of been a pattern over the last couple of months now, but I'm really happy to report that more and more of you are reporting that you're getting responses from MPs who've previously not replied. And some of you have managed to have some face-to-face meetings with your MPs recently. So really well done to everyone whose persistence is starting to pay off. And yeah, and big thank you to everyone also for sharing your actions, either through the I took action button on the website, or by emailing directly, or however you're choosing to do it. So I was wondering if I could. I'm just going to put the link to that button on the chat, by the way, just so you can see it if you don't know about it already. I was wondering if I could ask a couple of people to say how your kind of recent uh, MP meetings went, and I wanted to pick on Jen if she's here from Cheshire. I saw you earlier. There you are. Hi.
Hi, Naveed. Yeah, so Sanjay from the Cheshire Group managed to get hold of Tim Rocker, who is our new Labour MP for Macclesfield. And originally he was going to have a telephone call, but Tim Rocker decided, actually, let's meet face to face. So myself, Sanjay, and Jay met him in a local cafe 2 weekends ago now. On the Saturday, and we had half an hour with him where we just had coffee, and he was very supportive of what we were trying to do with results and very receptive to what we had to say, and was keen to get involved with us, including saying that he would speak to Annalise Dodds and was willing to ask a parliamentary question. Now, obviously, the timing was very odd because that was on the Saturday, and then the Monday was the day that the aid cuts were announced. And he's either really got a really good poker face, or he had no idea of what was about to happen, because it was just, he was really receptive to us, wanted to set up regular meetings, really knowledgeable about development issues. So we hope that it's the start of a really good relationship, and that we can continue to use our voice, and that he knows who we are now. So when we're writing letters to him, he knows who it is that he's speaking to. So it was very positive, and we were really spurred on by it. And then it got a bit deflated a little bit on the Monday, but hey ho, that's what we're here for. So we'll carry on, keep doing what we're doing, really.
Thanks, Jen. Really well done for getting that meeting. And I think our take on it would be he probably almost certainly didn't know in advance.
Yeah.
It looks like even senior political figures got a surprise there. So thank you so much, and well done. Do we have Glynis and Peter on the call? They've also
They said
recently.
they're going out.
Oh, okay, right. So there's another visit really recently from Glynis and Peter in Bournemouth East. So that's another Labour MP, and I was hoping they'd be on the call to tell us how that went, but never mind. And I know also that Corinne in Stork Valley had a meeting with her MP for the first time, and I know that Jill in Sutton also had a meeting for the first time quite recently. I don't know if Corinne or Jill are here. If not, that's okay. But it's really good to see these meetings coming in. So I'd like to move next to say a huge thank you to all of you who came to Parliament on the 11th of February. Feels like a long time ago, and also not. So this was to help build political support for ODA on the 20th anniversary of Nelson Mandela's visit to London, when he kicked off the Make Poverty History campaign back in 2005. So a big thank you to Prina, Gaurav, Girwani, Kirthana, Richard, Andrew, Helen, and Deirdre for coming along to fly the flag. I hope you all enjoyed the day. And again, if anyone wants to say about how that day went, then yeah, please do.
Well, it was fantastic. We had a session in the morning with various speakers, many speakers, 20 speakers, some on Zoom, South African ambassador, many High Commissioner, many speakers. Then we had our picture taken and went to Parliament. It was sponsored by a Baroness who's very much for the 0.7%, so it was definitely on target. And some MPs came, some of the Lords came. So no, it's fantastic to be part of that. It was very good. Thanks to Naveed and the One organisation for organising it. Let us go.
I did very little. It was mainly others outside of results, but we were invited to be part of it, which was brilliant. Thank you, Richard. And yeah, thank you to all of you who either managed to reach your MPs on the day or who followed up with them afterwards. And did anyone else want to have a quick say about that meeting? Okay, so just like to move on then, and well, I don't know how you felt, but for me, it's quite emotional actually to be in Westminster to commemorate such an important milestone in the UK's support for ending poverty. And honestly, that feels so much more poignant this week than it did back then. Next, thank you to everyone who's continued to share your actions in support of the replenishments for the funds for nutrition and vaccination programs. So again, if I've missed some people out, I apologise. If I've already thanked you, I apologise. I'm trying my best to keep up. Thank you, Pete, Karen, Tony, Kathy, Jill, Janet, Anne, and Michelle, and probably more as well. Both of these funds are, I think, well, in theory, supposed to be replenished in March, but with the UK government quoting their forthcoming spending review as a reason not to make a specific commitment right now, what's actually going to happen really isn't clear. And you've also, I'm sure, noticed that the minister who you've been writing to, who we've been asking you to write to, Annalise Dodds, has resigned in protest at the cuts. And we now have a new minister, Baroness Chapman of Darlington, to write to in the future. I'm just going to put what little I've been able to spot about her. This is just from the government website in the chat. It's very little indeed. But even with the ODA cuts, we feel we do need to still argue for these vital programmes. So a huge thank you to all of you for your commitment in taking these actions in the first few months of the year, despite the very difficult political signals we're getting right now. It's really important that politicians continue to hear that people care about these programmes, or it's just going to go off the radar. That's all the kind of network roundup from me. Kitty, is it okay if I carry on? I see our first speaker has arrived. I'm going to introduce her if we're ready to move on, I think.
Great.
Thank you. Our first speaker is Lisa Marchal, who is the Senior Manager of Grassroots Impact at the Results Education Fund, which is our partner organisation in the USA. If you don't already know, Results has a very big grassroots network in the US, covering all 50 states and reaching hundreds of Congress people and media outlets every year. So, Lisa, are you there? If you are, welcome.
I am. Hi. Am I coming through clearly?
You are. Thank you for joining us.
Hi. It's my pleasure to be invited. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. So many of you on the call will know that USAID, the vehicle through which US development as assistance is delivered, was cut just before the UK cuts were announced. And as this is a very big sum of money indeed, it could have a massive impact, will have a massive impact. So we thought, we knew people were kind of concerned about this, so we thought it'd be useful for you to hear about that and what Results is doing in the US to argue for some of the programs that we all care about. So I'm going to invite Lisa to basically speak. Over to you. Would you be able to briefly introduce yourself, maybe something about how Results works in the US and your responses to the cuts, and particularly if you've got anything you can say about how the grassroots advocacy is aiming to make a difference. And hopefully we'll have a few minutes for questions before we then move on to talk about the UK situation in the rest of the call. So yeah, Lisa, over to you if that's okay.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you. Naveed and I get to work together. We see each other monthly, and so this is an extra boost. Yeah, it's been remarkable. Well, first, let me say I have worked at Results. I just started my 18th year, and I have never lived in Washington, D.C., which is our headquarters. So I guess we were ahead of the curve with the Zoom and the video conferencing before it was in vogue or before it was necessary. I happen to live in Indianapolis, Indiana. Well known to people who like IndyCar racing. We host the Indianapolis 500. That is often a marker for people, but if that doesn't resonate with you, I live about 4 hours southeast of Chicago. So I told Naveed, and he knows, I am no policy expert. There's a reason I'm not on the policy team. My bread and butter is working with our volunteers. That's always been the team that I have been front facing with, working with volunteers around the country to speak to their senators and representatives about the issues that they care about. So I was glad to be asked for broad brushstrokes because my colleagues who live and breathe this every day know all the nitty gritty. I think that that are, there are some similarities in the way that our grassroots network works to yours. We find the power that, anybody can be an advocate with us from anywhere, but the real power, the real juice comes if we can offer them a group in their town where they can find solidarity, they can share ideas, and they can really kind of enhance the chorus of voices going to a particular set of senators or representative. Very generally, and this may be familiar to you, except if you live in Washington, D.C., any constituent in the United States is represented in Congress by 2 senators and 1 representative. Now, in more densely populated areas of the country, there may be many representatives that serve a state, but any American constituent is represented in 3 ways: 2 senators and a representative. And we support them to speak out on these issues, just as you are supported to speak to Parliament on these issues. And we support people to understand what it means to go in, to have a powerful, transformative kind of meeting with their legislators. Sometimes they're going in with to people who are already championing these issues, and sometimes they're going in with representatives or senators who actively are opposing it. But the message is the same. No matter where a constituent lives in the United States, we work on the same campaigns, looking to support the same basic outcomes for quality, smart, compassionate policy for the end of poverty, usually under the umbrellas of education, economic opportunity, and health. So really, I can safely say that what we have seen in the past 6 weeks is unprecedented here in the United States when it comes to USAID. At least when we were talking around, for those of us who have a long memory of this, we've just never seen it. So to give you a sense of how fast-paced this has been, January 24th, there was an executive order freezing aid and calling for the stoppage of work under the auspices of foreign assistance. 5 days later, our policy team noted that there were internal waivers for work to be unfrozen under the guise of life-saving humanitarian assistance. The problem was there was not clarity on what fit under that category. So that made it very hard, very difficult to implement those waivers properly and efficiently. On February 6th, there was a call for a dismantling of USAID, really making any waivers moot. The next day, we were starting to talk together about what is the future of aid, because we were not going to give up on talking about what our responsibility is, but with disruption to USAID, what could that mechanism look like? So we knew we had to be starting to think about that. On February 14th, a federal judge ordered the administration to restore funding and temporarily end the stop work order, which was very positive. But then just a week later, after that, the freeze was back in play. 3 days after that, February 24th, the waiver process we knew was really a mess. Payments weren't happening properly throughout the system. And then on February 27th, over 90% of all USAID programs were terminated, about 92%. Even as recently as yesterday, there has been Supreme Court action on this, but we have been living, honestly, in the past 6 to 7 weeks in a, that's great, what's going to happen tomorrow kind of feeling. Nothing feels permanent, nothing feels resolved. And in the meantime, there's not only been a disruption of the USAID expertise, but most importantly, lives who are affected by these programs. So that's the roller coaster that we've been on here in the United States. And, our volunteers are working, they're going to school, they're raising families, they're watching the news, but they don't necessarily have their heads down in every detail. And yet, even with the broad brushstrokes, it's like we're on a boat that's just at sea like this. So, to your question of what we've been doing, it's been incredible to see the advocates come together and say, what can we do to make sure that this doesn't stand? We understand the reality, we understand the headwinds coming against us, but we had been starting to put out alerts to our network as early as January 24th, even though that was going into a weekend, so that they could start taking actions. And a lot of it was really learning about what was happening technically with the issue, but using the same skills they've always used, using the very same skills of relationship, persistence, powerful speaking, and again, I say persistence, of going back and talking to the legislators that they know, maybe they don't know. Keep in mind, we just had an election, and many of our advocates had not even had an opportunity to have a first meeting with some of these new senators and representatives, and here we were thrown into a crisis. So using the power of well-crafted letters, well-crafted phone calls, well-crafted meetings, and we already had on the docket our first 100 days lobby push. Our theme for the year is called Action and Allies, and the first tranche of that work was going to be, and still is, the first 100 days lobby push. Our goal to get in front of all 100 senators and as many key House members as possible, meaning that they sit on key committees related to results work. So we already had that plan in place. And so we've just been taking this issue into those meetings, but also because of the urgency, reaching out to offices as persistently as possible and sharing the invitation to come alongside. I would imagine it might be the same for you, that you've had people interested in what's going on because you have your own crisis and people are asking the question, what can I do? So that is really where we've been, and we're persisting going forward. The last thing I'll say is that we are belatedly wrapping up our fiscal year 25 budget, and that has fights of its own. But this would be the time of year that we would be going into congressional offices to talk about what's called appropriations. That's simply the budgeting process where we can go in, particularly on our global health priorities, and say, these are the things we want supported, and get really specific about the funding levels that we think are necessary in the world. And so we're actually going in, even in the midst of all of this chaos, and saying, what are we doing for fiscal year 26? These are the priorities. These are the things that need to happen in the world. We know the mechanism is not what it was a few weeks ago, but these are still the priorities, and we're not giving up on that because that budget process will still go forward. So we're doing our best to try to take care of each other, to pace ourselves, to keep up with the urgency, but not be overwhelmed, because it's a bit of an emotional piece as well for so many of us. And it really heartens us to know that advocates like you who are in the network in places around the country, you're doing the same, even as you face your own difficulties and crises. There's a solidarity there, and we acknowledge definitely what you're going through, and it's at least good to be in this together. So I hope that overview is helpful.
Thank you, Lisa. That really, really is. And you know, I think it's amazing to hear. I think it's really important that we're all kind of in not quite in the same boat together, in a very similar place. And I just thought it'd be really useful to hear. And I know people were interested in hearing a bit more about the situation on the other side of the Atlantic. On the other hand, I'm slightly worried that there's twice the amount of doom and gloom. But I think it's really important that we all stand together in these kind of times. So thank you so much for joining us. I think we've got maybe a very few minutes for questions, because we have to get onto the UK situation as well.
Absolutely.
To share a couple of things in the chat, and because not everybody, I think there's one or two people who are joining on the phone, so they won't be able to see that. Michelle has shared that the Stop TB Partnership, which is a small UN agency, has had, or is likely to have, its funding shrinking by about half because of the funding from USAID being cut. So obviously that's a really big issue for the coordination of global TB programs. And obviously what part of the problem is when these cuts have happened, and then whether or not they row them back, a lot of the people might have left, which is something that I think people might be hearing about, the kind of the sheer chaos that that kind of stuff is creating. So that's a really good observation. Thank you, Michelle, for sharing that. Does anyone want to launch in with a question? I think we'll take 2 questions and then we'll move on.
Yes, please.
Richard.
Thank you very much, Lisa. That's fantastic. I was lucky to go enough to many years ago to the international conference, so we met some of the results. We realised, just as a matter of comparison, how many active volunteers do you have? And also, obviously, you deal with domestic issues as well. All these cuts are USAID. Does that mean that's all international cuts? And are there any domestic cuts for grants and things?
Oh, thank you for that question. You would think I would have the number of active volunteers at my fingertips, but we have a couple of tranches. I can tell you for scope that we have our weekly update, which is our main primary communication that goes out to anyone who's interested in receiving results materials, is about 6,500. Now, that doesn't mean we have 6,500 active in local groups. We have, I don't think we've done our full audit for this year, but I want to say we have roughly 70 groups around the country. We're in between 40 and 50 countries. We'd love to be in all 50 countries stably, but there always seem to be a few that elude us. And then any particular group, it could range from actually one solo advocate to a group of 20. So that gives you a bit of set of the scope. So many hundred that are deeply, deeply active, and then it kind of cascades out to about 6,500 who receive our newsletter and can take action from that as well. And then to your question, USAID is internationally focused. Now, because of the interconnectivity of work and expertise, the USAID freeze and stop work order does affect entities that are located in the United States, but the focus is foreign assistance. Simultaneously, there are threats to social protection programs here in the US that we're trying to stave off as well, particularly, and that comes in the budgeting process that is being worked on right now, particularly something called SNAP, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program for families. Also Medicaid, which is health insurance for lower income Americans, those on disability, those who cannot work for different reasons. And also we are looking to protect and expand something called the Child Tax Credit, which can go back to families on a per child basis to help them with basic needs. So we're trying to balance both. We've got the foreign assistance crisis, and then we've got what's bubbling up domestically as well. So it's a bit of a juggling act with our volunteers.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to take one more question quickly from Kathy, and then we need to move on. Kathy, over to you.
Thanks very much. I just was wondering a little bit about the political process, because I was just wondering, is there any point in talking to your representatives and senators if what happens is done from the top, and there doesn't seem to be any checks and balances that the elected groups that you're made contact with seem to be completely sidelined at this stage? Could you just clarify that a little bit for me?
Absolutely. I appreciate the question. We have, in theory, if you take government class when you're a young American, you've got the judicial branch, which is the Supreme Court, the executive branch, which is the president, and the branch of Congress, the legislative branch, that are meant to be holding each other in checks and balances. The interesting thing is, particularly with funding that was appropriated to USAID and funding that's appropriated in the future. That's Congress's power of the purse. And so we're reminding Congress they have the authority to push back on these efforts because the power of the purse is held with them. In the case of what's happened with USAID, that was money already signed off on. And then the future appropriations, looking to sign off on that again. So we're trying to speak into the reality of what the checks and balances are, so that we can maybe turn this around. We're very well aware of the difficulty of the situation, but there are some things like that that are in our favor, you might say, that we can speak to and say, Congress, protect the money that you wanted spent on these particular programs. We want to hold you accountable and we want to support you to do that.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to move us on now. I see a question from Pete in the chat, but I have a sneaking suspicion that this is going to be covered by some of the things that we might be covering a little bit later in the call. So we do have to move on. I know we could spend probably the whole rest of the hour on the situation in the US, but we can't. We have to move to the UK situation and what we're asking you to do this month. So Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. If you are able to stay for the rest of the call, please do. But I know it's the middle of the working day for you. But either way, we're so grateful that you've been here. You're part of our global results partnership, and good luck in your own ongoing advocacy on these cuts.
Thank you. I will take my leave because I'm in the middle of helping support advocates do their lobbying work. But please know that we are so thrilled, as Results US, to be in solidarity with you. We're keeping our eye on what you're dealing with and what you're working on. It's not far from our minds, and you have a friend in us. So just all good things for your work. Keep it up. Well done, and we'll see you along the way.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks. Bye.
So this feels like a bit of a whirlwind. We're going to go straight on to our next speaker. So many of you have met him already. It is Vinny Wooding, who's our Parliamentary Affairs Manager at Results UK. Welcome, Vinny.
Evening, everyone. How
Hello.
are we?
So I know you probably know a lot of people on the call already, but not everybody will have met you. So I wonder if you could just introduce yourself, what your role is at Results, and then just as Lisa did, we're going to ask you to launch straight into a kind of an overview of last week's cuts to the UK's ODA budget, why this is a bad thing for the issues Results care about. I think it's probably pretty obvious, but if you could give us an overview, and then again, something about what you feel our next steps should be, both as Results and, and a wider kind of group of people who are interested in supporting international development. So I might have to cut your time down a bit. If you could do all of that in 10 minutes, that would be amazing.
I can certainly try. Those of you who've heard me speak before know I have a tendency to go on, so I'll try and keep it to 10 minutes. Hi everyone. For those that don't know me, I'm Vinny. I've been at Results for 3.5 years now, and I've recently just moved from doing the TB officer role to the parliamentary team manager role kind of thing, which is just a bit broader for our parliamentary engagement. So I work with all the members of the parliamentary team a bit more closely now on all the things we do in Parliament. And so, yes, Naveed has asked me to come today to speak about the horror that happened last week. And do you know what? It's interesting in particular that we've had an American colleague join us for this, because I really kind of distinctly remember like it must have been late January, early February, seeing what was going on in America. And I'm sorry for bringing this up while Kissy's on the call. Seeing what was going on in America, and I was like, oh, well, they could, the government could be doing this, government could be doing that, but it's like, no, that's not going to happen here. That only happens in places like Trumpland. And then, to my absolute shock and horror, 6 weeks later, a Prime Minister stands up in the House of Commons and just really explicitly links cutting development with funding war. And that to me was just outrageous. Like, you know, I've done a bit of digging since, and I really can't find a comparable example of this happening before in the House of Commons. And so you can imagine, I mean, so if that in itself wasn't bad enough, it feels even worse that it was done by someone who is ostensibly a socialist Labour Prime Minister. And so, and then also, I think the other thing that really got to me was the immediacy of it. I was in a call on the Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock, and Alex, one of our colleagues, said to me, she's like, "Have you seen this about the rumour that they're going to cut the aid budget?" And I was like, "Not a hope in hell that's happened." I was like, "They wouldn't do that." I was like, "They absolutely wouldn't do that." And 2.5 hours later, I watched the Prime Minister stand up in the Commons and do it. I was shocked. And you know, for those of you who've like read the blog that I wrote for, I mean, I am angry. I'm just so, but I think more than anything, I'm just so incredibly disappointed. Like, this is, I'd be lying if I said that the kind of internationalism was one of the things that really, you know, draws me to the Labour Party. I've been a member of the Labour Party for a really long time, but I just can't see myself in a party that would do something like this. It really does offend me to my core, and as I say, it made it even worse. The double whammy was that it was, you know, I said to a group of our colleagues last week, I just got this image in my head of kind of Keir Starmer with a fork in one hand taking food out of malnourished people's mouths, and then, you know, poking off Nigel Farage in the other hand, kind of thing. It's just, everything about it is absolutely awful. I guess what the impacts are going to be is still really to be seen. You know, I think one of the things that we've gathered is this really caught the FCDO off guard. You know, I don't think the Foreign Secretary was involved in this decision at all. I think he was told this is what's going to happen. And I think the whole department was told this is what's going to happen. So you're already on the back foot then as the FCDO. So, I mean, you know, what it actually looks like moving forward in terms of the cuts, we really don't know. David Lammy wrote in his piece in The Guardian over the weekend. Yeah, it was over the weekend. Oh no, it wasn't. It was last week. That the process of finding where the cuts are going to come will begin immediately, but will take a number of weeks or months. I mean, especially in this year where we've got like 3-4 really significant, like, major multilateral replenishments. You can't help, I mean, you know, someone that likes to deal in grand narratives like myself, you can't help but feel a little bit like multilateralism from both the US and from the UK has just sort of died a death on our, not I say on our watch, but like something has changed. There's been a real paradigm shift in the last kind of 10 days. And so I think that really calls to us to not only be saying, you know, writing to our MPs, getting in contact with power brokers and parliamentarians and saying, you know, our British law says that that the government must spend 0.7% of gross national income on international development. So, like, the government are breaking the law with this course of action. But similarly to similar to the US, what can we do about it? Like, that, you know, there is no mechanism by which we can, well, you know, we can go through a judicial review. The sector could go through a judicial review, but extremely costly, unlikely to really do anything. So again, I think this also feeds into the kind of sense of powerlessness that we felt over the last 10 days. You know, this work that we're all really passionate about it feels like it's just kind of evaporated. So what are we going to do about it, I guess, is the next thing. Like, everything is awful, but what are we going to do about it? So I think if we accept the reality of the situation, it's unlikely that we're going to be able to completely reverse this. Like, I'm not under any illusions. Like, this is happening. I think there is a question to the extent at which it happens. Now, that isn't to say I think even in the best case scenario, we're still losing 75% of the money. But there might be an argument to try and save maybe 25% of it. And when I say 75 and 25%, that is of the 6 billion which is going to be cut. So I think, what would that be? 4.5 billion is gone. But there's probably about 1.5 billion that maybe with some consistent pressure, with some really targeted advocacy, we might be able to, find a way to keep in the budget. But I think that what that means for us more widely is, I think we really need to kind of take a step back in the grand scheme of things. I think if we consider ourselves in a sort of it feels like we're in a bit of a zero-sum game. Well, we are in a zero-sum game with the aid skeptics. Like for everything that they gain, we lose, and vice versa. And actually, it feels like they are kind of continually beating us back. And actually, it feels like we're actually at the point now where we're right on the back foot here. And I think what it requires of us is we really need, and you will have heard me say this quite a lot at results. We really need to think about how doing development differently. Like, what actually does development mean in the 21st century? Does it mean the UK government has 6 billion, which it controls entirely bilaterally, which it chooses to give to these countries, but on the promise of you scratch my back, I scratch yours? Or is it going to be towards multilateralism, using big funds which cover big prominent global issues, that kind of funding mechanism? Or is it going to be something that we haven't thought of before, or is still in the infancy of it being thinking? Is there a new funding model? Is there a new way of doing international development that we can really be pressing? Because it feels like the situation that we're in now is that we've kind of lost this battle, but we need to start thinking about what the next one's going to be, and to do that, we need to really get back to basics on why international development is important, why we think the UK should be playing this role internationally, the actual positive impact that this work does, and really driving home the lived experience of people who are living in these scenarios, living at the edge of poverty for reasons that we've caused historically, that they're now having to deal with. We need to really think about what our enduring message around that kind of narrative is going to be. And I think we as a sector and we as people that are passionate about this really need to think about how we couch this moving forward. Because I think, when you explain what international development is to people, when I have spoken to anyone in my entire life about what my job is, and maybe this is, again, maybe this is a really significant bias, but no one's ever said to me, "What are you doing that for? That's rubbish. That's horrible." I was saying to people, I'm trying to eliminate TB around the world. I'm trying to get TB vaccines to people that need it. And I've never heard one person say to me, "Stupid career choice that. What you're doing is awful. Why would you do that?" Because when you have a conversation with people about what development is here for and what we do, it's a demonstrably good thing. But we're losing the narrative to the big mouths and the charlatans and I'm sure I'm not going to mention the names, but we all know who I'm talking about. We're losing the argument to them, and we've got to get it back. But
Vinny,
worry not that we are working on it, and we are endeavouring to come up with that new reality.
Thank you, Vinny. I'm just going to stop you there. I think you've given us a lot of food for thought, and it's a time I think where we all feel really passionate. I'm sure we've all got our ways of explaining it similar to Vinny's. I can see a couple of things in the chat which I really want to make sure we pick up on before the end of the call. But I want to just quickly ask you, Vinny, because I think we've just asked the network to write to David Lammy or write to the government. It kind of doesn't matter who we wrote to, and we think he probably wasn't one of the decision makers. But you've talked about, some of this is lost, but we could win a bit. And I'm just wondering, we're also thinking that it's really important to continue to engage politicians and MPs so that, we don't just go away. So that feels like a little bit of a contradiction. And obviously, we've not worked all of this through yet. It's still only a few days old. But I wonder if you could help us work through, or just explain like why it's necessary for us to keep involved and get back in the ring.
So I think in the first instance, if memory serves me correctly, these cuts are scheduled to come in 2027. So there is going to be, from my understanding, although obviously we're yet to see we are yet to see the plans. My understanding is that there's going to be a kind of ramp down from this point up until 2027. But that means that really for the next 12 months, we have 25% more than we have next year, just because of the way that a reduction of that length works. And I think especially because we've got these big multilateral replenishments this year, I think if we can really drive home the importance of these organizations and see if we can't like front load some of those cuts into organizations like the Global Fund and Gavi, who are having their replenishments this year. So I think that's kind of one of the ways in which we can start to claw some of that money back. If we can, divert it into some of the funds that are happening this year, I think is a very good way. But I also think if we continue to keep the pressure on the government in terms of our just disgust with this decision in general, I think they may roll back on it a little bit. There may be a little bit of fiscal room that just appears, as the government often tends to find. And maybe some of that money then can then be kind of put back into the international development budget. So it is a pretty fast-moving situation, and we're still really to see the details. But I just think there has to be some opportunities over the next kind of 18 months.
Thank you, Vinny. So I think the message there is hopefully our efforts on, well, hopefully, we don't know, our efforts on nutrition for growth and vaccinations over the recent months will still bear some fruit, perhaps not as much as we would have liked. And we do need to be continuing that political pressure for whatever the future looks like. Pete has had his question in the chat for some time now. I do want to come back to that. Pete was asking, for those of you who can't see the chat box, is it remotely part of Results' advocacy to suggest alternative sources of funding for the military rather than ODA? Now, I'm not going to, partly the answer is yes, because we chose to publish Vinny's blog on our website. So it's part of our answer to say, yeah, absolutely, there's alternatives. We haven't done a lot of policy work on this, but I know, Vinny, you mentioned a few things that you thought of. Do you want to share your thoughts on that?
Yes, I will. And actually, before I do that, I will say one of my favorite lines from my blog post, which I actually didn't write, but Alex did, was that, governments make political decisions, and this is a political decision. This didn't have to be done. The government looked at the state of things and said, development, that's what we're going to do. So they've gone out of their way and made a conscious decision to do that, and I think that adds a little bit of extra interest to it. As part of my blog, I did suggest some alternate bits of funding. Haven't got it up, but I can remember it sort of off the top of my head. Each year, the government spends about £3.5 billion on consultants, management consultants from organisations like KPMG, Deloitte, organisations like that. I have a personal bias against those organisations anyway. But £3.2 billion on private sector consultants in the government. That's nearly half of what the proposed cut is. That to me is a very straightforward thing. I'm a bit of a realist. I know you need some consultants, but 3.4 billion. No. We collectively as the country, but also alongside the European Union, hold about 20 billion in seized Russian assets. So obviously when the war broke out, the UK and European allies seized a lot of assets. It's worth about 20 billion, and the government are currently using the interest on that holding to help kind of funnel some money back into Ukraine. liquidate all that money, liquidate it all. That money is directly linkable to the men, because they all are men in Russia, who started this war. So the government has the power. It would require legislation. They can liquidate those assets. There's 20 billion that funds the cut for the next 4 years. What else? I mean, I don't. Did I put up? I didn't put the wealth tax. I don't think I put a wealth tax in my. No, I think I did. But then if we're looking at other sort of
You did
other
put a wealth
alternative
tax in your blog.
was it
I
a wealth
thought.
tax?
Yeah,
That
yeah,
was
I
one of
think you
them.
did.
I mean, here's the thing. I've got 1,000,001 ideas. A wealth tax. I'd like to see what's the capital gains tax, changes to capital gains tax, changes to property tax, things like that. There are plenty of sources of money if the government want to go and get it. They're just making political decisions about where the money should come from.
Absolutely, thanks, Vinny. The bottom line is this was a choice, and they didn't have to do it.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, stimulating that set of ideas and thoughts, Pete, with your question. There's been a little bit in the chat about other ways of combating poverty other than aid. So Vinny, that's I think you've sort of answered this, but if we could just briefly, because I know this is something you're interested in as well. We talk about all the things that can be done with that ODA budget, which is, at the best it was something like 15 billion pounds a year, but that's kind of a drop in the ocean compared to the need. And we also know that there's a lot of other things, including financial flows, tax debt, tax collection, the trade flows, all sorts of things that kind of are big as well. So I wonder if you could just say a little bit, if we are going to have to move to look beyond ODA, what are the other things that you think will be kind of productive for us to be doing some work on that, perhaps? And you don't have to give this is speculative at this stage. We've got to all work out our way forward.
Yeah, see, my problem is I could honestly speak for 90 minutes on this topic, and it's quite, I guess in some ways quite related to the PhD that I'm doing at the moment. I think there's what I see to be two big ways, two things that I believe would make a hugely outsized difference in the alleviation of poverty, and also help to, and I don't. This isn't necessarily what I mean, but help develop countries would be two things. The first one would be to look at the global economic system. There are untold amounts of capital floating around in the global economic system, and if the rules of the system could be altered, can be reshaped, that will free up and liberate a lot of countries, typically countries that we associate with underdevelopment, poverty, a lot of places in Africa. It would help alleviate some of the problems around their loans and interest rates that they pay back to organizations like the International Monetary Fund, but also in interest rates that they would pay to private companies who exploit their lands, and etc., etc. So I think there is, an economic lens through which we can look at this. It's like, actually, if we want to see a real poverty alleviation, then we need to look at the structures of economics that are also keeping people in poverty. It's not just about giving out TB vaccines, although that's very important. It's also about making sure that that person has the opportunity to live as fruitful and as wholesome and as happy a life as I can here, or as someone in China or Latin America can. So I think that's one thing. I think the second thing that we can do, and it's a bit more kind of nuanced, but I think as powerful, is really the way we talk about development, the way we talk about the work that we do, the way that we conceptualize the things that we do, paints a picture of what the rest of the world is like. And I think we see a lot of the negative sides of this, in like white saviorism, blaxploitation, where we have these kind of dishonest messaging, dishonest narratives, dishonest communication about what development is. And what that leads to is really out of touch opinions as to what the rest of the world is like. And I think through the process of us telling a more convincing and better story about development, actually what we're helping to do is paint a better reality of the world for people who are a bit more close-minded, who think that, everything over there is rubbish and everything over here is great. We're actually helping to bring up a standard of like development discourse, but also the way that we think about other people across the world.
Thank you, Vinny. That for me is an incredibly powerful point to end on, and I feel like we could actually start a whole new conference call on that topic. Maybe we will, because that's really important for us to come back to. It's something we've talked a bit about before, but I think the future is definitely in that direction. So I'm going to have to, call it a day for this call now. We're at 9 o'clock. I want to say thank you to everybody who's already, picked up their pen or their keyboard or their phone to their MP. Just joining the call just a few minutes earlier, I had messages from 4 or 5 of you who were reporting just messages from your MP that had just come in the last 24 hours or even more recently than that. I won't name everybody now, but Tony has just said that she's got a message from Jill saying her Lib Dem MP is talking about other sources of funding like taxes on social media firms and tech giants, for example. So this debate about that non-zero sum game between defence and aid is already happening. We had a very well attended debate in Parliament today, which lots of MPs spoke at. So I think just because the government said this isn't going to happen doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of political fallout from this, and that's something that we'll be keeping an eye out on for the next for the foreseeable future, really. And we'll be obviously keeping you up to date with where we think we can make the most impact given this rather difficult situation that we're in now. So that is kind of the end of this session. I'm just going to put in the chat before we go action request, which you should have received by email, but in case you prefer it to pick it up from here, it's in the chat now. And yeah, we've just run out of time, so let's say a big thank you for Vinny for explaining a bit more about the cuts, looking into your crystal ball to see what might happen next, and give us a bit of a sense of some of those small wins that we might make, that we know these programs make such a difference around the world. So if we can rescue some of that will be really, really important. As always, we're going to put the links to all the things in the chat in the recording, in the description of the recording when we put that up on our website. And lastly, I think Kitty mentioned it at the beginning of the call, but the first 3 months of 2025, we have moved this call to a Thursday, but we are going to check with you what works best going forward, because we haven't yet, and we should. I have one thing to plug. I'm sorry, I'm going to go over by a couple of minutes here, which is we have an event in London on the 25th of March, day after World TB Day. And it's at 10 a.m. just on Parliament Square, and it's a debate hosted by Results. And on the panel, we'll have a representative of the South African High Commission, hopefully a government minister, fingers crossed, if we haven't scared them all off, and a senior academic working on TB research, and 1 or 2 more as well. There are a few spaces. It is first come, first served, and they are limited. So if you are interested, please get in touch with Vinny. I am going to put his contact details in that now. If you aren't able to pick those up, we're going to send out the details in Newsflash, which should be the middle of next week. So that's our monthly newsletter. When you see that, please get in touch with Vinny, and if you're interested in going along to that. So we need to end the call. As usual, we'll keep the call open for another up to a half an hour for anyone who is able to stay and chat informally, but this is the sort of formal end of the call. Thank you in advance for everything that you can do to persuade the government, at least to give an indication of how we might reverse those cuts in the very longer term, or medium to longer term. But for now, this is where we are. Thank you all so much for being part of this, and have a good rest of the evening.